that the cultural values of the colonizer are inherently superior to one's own. The term has been used by post-colonial scholars to discuss the transgenerational effects of colonialism present in former colonies following decolonization. And as a mental health professional, of course, I have to share with you, so some signs are literally these kind of insecurities, anxieties, also perpetuating discrimination against less westernized Filipino community, right? So it's like that divide and conquer where we're infighting, right? Desiring lighter skin, this is very common in our culture as well, the colorism, right? And yeah, denying, tolerating, or minimizing the kind of historical and modern day oppression, and just feeling ashamed and embarrassed by being Filipino, right? What was the other piece? Okay. So culturally, another barrier for us is we have these two terms that you hear a lot, and they hold so much weight for us. So the first one is utang na loob. And you know, I'm going to translate it, and it's so deep and it's so serious because it's literally this inner debt you feel towards others. So it's like this inner debt we're supposed to feel towards our parents, towards our elders, towards the government, towards people in positions of power. So it's kind of translated as a debt of gratitude and a sense of responsibility to another and an acknowledgement of others. So if we read it through like generational wound and trauma lens, it's also this obligation of martyrdom almost, and enmeshment with like no boundaries, and boundaries feel like abandonment or rejection. And the other really specifically Filipino piece is this concept of hiya, walang hiya, which means shame. So that's like the biggest insult you could ever get in our culture if someone tells you you have no shame. So it's you're being shameless, you're inconsiderate, you're violating social convention. And we're hoping there are movements now that are kind of reclaiming these terms to look at them from a more decolonized lens. So for utang na loob, we are trying to see it as, instead of this inner debt, it's like this appreciation of solidarity and like a connection with healthy boundaries and just like acknowledgement of just like each other's human beingness, right? And a decolonized way to kind of address the shame in our culture would be to unravel these internalized generational societal expectations and disconnecting all of that from like our sense of worth, right? Just by being here, by being human, we're worthy, period, right? Like that's a full sentence.
So I like to reclaim, coming from my queerness background too, I would like to reclaim walang hiya. I am walang hiya, so there you go. I'm literally holding the mic in here and just speaking to you all. I like doing it. But in terms of, again, more effects, so Franz talked about the mental health of it, and I would like to dwell on more of the immigration stuff. Most of us in here came from a very specific migration wave, so that would be live-in caregiver. Then that takes a lot of years, decades even, with an S at the end, because once you go and come in here, you come in here for a work status, and your work status is connected to your immigration status. So that leads to a lot of exploitation and manipulation and abuses. And because we have, again, this mentality of like walang hiya and utang na loob, we're inherently just told to keep our head down with all of these abuses that most of us have been experiencing because it's better than nothing. So I think we should have addressed the better than nothing aspect. That's what most of people tell us, like, oh, you're 10 cents, like there's $1 difference with your pay. It's okay, it's better than nothing, you know. So they, for us, there's a lot of fear of repercussion because they might jeopardize their immigration status, which is, again, connected to their employment status. And then they cannot vote because they're not citizen, right? So they cannot vote on bills or laws that affect, or I would even say target them, right? So we're us citizens, we're deciding for these people, and they have no say whatsoever. So I would like to point out Bill 96 as well. And then it comes back to the perpetual foreigners, right? And I would even argue in an immigration standpoint that we're permanent, temporary foreign workers. Because once they get their PR, like they don't bother or not bother, but because it takes so much time and money just to get your PR, then you gotta go do the application to be a citizen. They find that they're already secured when they have their PR. So at least half of them just don't want to go pursue and have citizenship to be able to vote, because that's the difference. If you have a PR and an immigration a citizen, the only difference is that you cannot vote. So for them it's okay because it's better than nothing in the Philippines, right? Like, oh, this is a white people place. This is they do their thing, they do their election, and they just go on to their job, to their low wage minimum job, and being abused, and it's okay because it's better than nothing. So that was the overall sentiment for a lot of Filipinos in here. And again, it takes like tightening the border. It takes. Hello, they lost it. I lost it. Tightening the borders. It takes more time now. It even goes to decades. And so there's no resources or incentive for them to actually take ownership of this land, take ownership of this home. Like, we live in this town. We have been living in uptown. It's been a while now. And learning French, so when we tackle Bill 96, they just don't have any more incentive because of that. Oh, can I bring in my family? Can I not bring my family? That's extra $2,000 for me to just apply. I don't have money, and I would like to point out that, again, we're coming here for a specific labor market, which is the low wage ones. And like, it would be nice for our degrees to be recognized and be professionalized. I would be processing papers where they have 2 degrees. You know, we're missing a lot of healthcare workers. Where, guess what? We're the #1 healthcare providers. So like, we're working in Tim Hortons, we're working in Walmart. When we've been needing healthcare workers, but you know, the deprofessionalization and then them just like wanting us to do specific thing, it's very prevalent. And then the gatekeeping of it, right? Like the bureaucracy. You go on and say, I would like to have my degrees recognized. You don't know where to go. You don't have money to do it. It takes so much time. You have to respect your working permit, so you gotta go work. And then lastly, can people hear me? People can hear me. I can speak loud. Yeah, thanks. Lastly, again, like the limited access or like the lack of resources. So there's limited access to educational training. Almost 60% of the Filipino community do not speak French because there's no incentive. They go home to their employers, they don't really speak to anyone, so there's no incentive. And then that means you're stuck. There's no job training, you're stuck in this vicious cycle of just earning low wage or minimum wage, and sometimes they don't even know that the minimum wage goes up. It's better than nothing. It's okay, don't complain, keep your head down. And then sports and recreational and after-school programs, like 35% of Filipinos in Montreal are under the age of 24, and I'm 27, so like we have a lot of Filipino youth who's just like in this vicious cycle of not feeling belong, feeling like no one's paying attention to them, and then the cycle continues. And then there's no appropriate newcomer services. There's no mental health support as a newcomer. One of the first things that I tell people is that I can drink water from the tap. Really? I can do that? So like little things like that is like a culture shock for us, and like we obviously we don't ask for help because girl boss mentality, we gotta do it ourselves. And then lack of awareness of our rights and involvement in the community. So prone to be taken advantage of, and then this again leads back to model minority. We're the model minority. We can do it ourselves when in reality we can do it together. We can do it together.
Yes, just adding a little thing. So yes, prone to doing things ourselves, but also prone to kind of just packing up and leaving, right? Quebec ends up being a really transitory place for the Filipino community, which means that politically, a lot of politicians don't really care about us because we don't really, there's a small pocket that votes who actually have citizenship, and the rest kind of try it out here, and then once the language barrier gets a little bit too complicated, they kind of just say, you know what, we'll pack up and move. But for those of us who are now like 1.5, 2, getting into third, like my son is like 2.5, maybe 3 generations now, this is home for him. He was born here. Quebec is home for him. So how do we encourage kind of more civic engagement and understanding of like the political system within our community? So I think that leads us to what we're going into next, which is, yes, what are some better alternatives for policing the Filipinx community? So empowering the community to be aware and educated about their rights, encouraging them to participate in direct politics, creating safer spaces within the community, because we spoke to that before, right? So we do actually have community spaces and community centers, but they are run by more conservative elders. So there is actually, unfortunately, a culture of harm there of, for example, queer youth seeking services and being shamed. Mixed race children, like I'm raising a mixed race child, my husband is Latino, so mixed race children going to ask for support from these community organizations and them being told they're not Filipino enough. You know, so like there's a culture of harm within as well, and that's kind of the culture that we want to address and dismantle with Sant Kapwa. So spaces that encourage Filipinx decolonization, right? Like what does that mean for us, for our minds to understand that it's pretty wild that we just voted in the son of a dictator and the reason why a lot of us are here. Encouraging more decolonial culture affirming spaces is exactly what we're trying to do with Sant Kapwa. Intergenerational leadership, civic engagement, as I mentioned earlier, community capacity building, and just more education on like how do we access these community-based funding. You know, we look at other communities who've been around as long as us and they have beautiful centers and libraries and things like that, but we never step up to the plate to ask for what we're owed, what we deserve, right? When the STM shuts down, Westmount shuts down because all the Filipino workers can't get there. So basically the wealth in Westmount has been built on the backs of a lot of Filipino workers, right? It doesn't run. You can't make your millions if there's the lady not cleaning your house or watching your kid, you know, or taking care of your elderly parents. A little bit more difficult to build your Fortune 500 company, right? So yeah, and more representation when it comes to the decision-making process, because nothing about us without us is for us. So in closing, we wanted to share a little bit of Filipinx activist history with you. I'm sure, and if this will actually also demonstrate and prove, you know, just like the disturbing invisibility in our cultures. In our culture, Vero spoke to it a bit. Like, I'm sure you've all encountered a Filipina nurse in your lifetime, but have we seen them on mainstream television? Have we seen, you know what I mean? Like, so it's pretty wild that I think we're in Canada, we're approximately 30% of the nurses, but we're not seen on the mainstream. So this is Lari Itliong. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with Cesar Chavez, who was a part of the labor movement in California. Funny enough, that labor movement was started by Lari Itliong. Lari Itliong is the one who recruited Cesar Chavez into the movement, but this is not what we always speak about, right? So he's the one who kind of started rallying people together and organizing, and we find that this is actually, we're going to teach you the official way that we close out activist meeting, which was created by Tito Lari Itliong and his community. So we have this term that we call isang bagsak. And what that means is if one falls, we all fall. And what we do is we do it as a unity clap. So shall we just demonstrate and then we can do it all together? I know there's a whole bunch of Filipinos here who know how to do it. Right? Come on, demonstrate. Sample, sample. Okay? Okay, isang bagsak. So you're basically, we're all gonna scream isang, and then when we say bagsak, we clap and we stomp our feet together, and that unity, that sound is gonna go out into the universe to just inspire all this change that we need, right? Folks are ready? 1, 2, 3, isang bagsak! Thank you, everyone.